Hello everyone, welcome back. My name is Douglas Johnson. I'm a yoga teacher, meditation teacher, ordained minister, and certified Kilobi Inquiries Facilitator. And today I wanted to bring you a little talk about how to respond to emotional honesty. I think in terms of relationship, if you're a monk or a nun, honestly, you still do have relationships. Maybe if you're a hermit, you don't relate with other people. But for the vast majority of human beings, for most of their lives, relating with others will be a very important part of your journey, and how successfully and how well you do this will impact your sense of peace, your sense of well-being, your sense of joy, your sense of connectedness, and whether you feel loved and whether others feel loved by you. What could be more heartbreaking than loving someone and not having them feel loved by you, right? So you really do love somebody, but you are somehow unable to share and communicate that love with them. That's heartbreaking. And I actually see this quite a bit when I counsel couples and people. Very often there's a disconnect between what we'd like somebody to feel and what they actually feel. Now, surprisingly, this is often not a huge gulf or a gap. It's very often something that I see as not that difficult to surmount, to overcome. But it does take a certain amount of awareness and a certain amount of willingness to change. So I have other talks where I talked about emotional honesty. I might do another one at some point, but if you're wondering, what do I mean by emotional honesty? What is my definition of that? Please go back, check my Patreon or YouTube, and you will see video, or maybe there's even a few on there about emotional honesty. And I suggest watching those if you're unclear about that. If, however, you understand the concept of emotional honesty, again, for me, few tools are more important for how you are going to relate with others. And if you're wondering, well, what does this have to do with spirituality? I think it has a lot to do with spirituality, because I think the value and the impact of emotional honesty really comes from an awakened view where we aren't stuck in one perspective or one point of view, and we're able to relate with others and their perspective and their feelings and their point of view. So very basically, emotional honesty is, the basic formula is, when you do X, I feel Y. And this should always be based on patterns, not a single incident. Because a single incident, maybe you didn't sleep well. Maybe the other person said something completely out of character. This isn't really a technique for punishing or trying to resolve one issue. This is really about patterns, pattern recognition in relationship, and trying to resolve destructive or patterns that are not helpful for relating. So when you do X, I feel Y. And the key there is we can't really argue with that statement. What we could say is, oh, you shouldn't feel Y, right? So let's say when I ask you to take out the garbage and you don't, I feel that you don't love me. Well, someone can come along and say, well, you shouldn't feel that, because obviously I love you. I bought you a ring. I bought you a car. I'm doing all this stuff. So obviously I love you. That really is not helpful for emotional honesty. All those things may be true. And for you, you might be thinking, these are my expressions of love. It doesn't matter if I take out the trash or not. That has nothing to do with love. But what you're doing when you say that to someone, you're essentially gaslighting them. You're essentially telling them that their view of reality what they're feeling is illegitimate and that they shouldn't feel that. And as someone in a partnership, generally you want to avoid doing that. It's not to say that it's always wrong. So if you come to me for counseling or you go to a therapist, I may suggest that this is a possibility. I might say, you know, your feelings or this individual's feelings on this issue may be due to a traumatic past, and we should look and investigate and see if we can maybe change that, because there can be reactions and feelings that we have. It's not to say that they're illegitimate, but they actually come from unhealed wounds. And we're not going to be our best self, our highest self, if we are coming from unhealed wounds. So if you are a follower of this teaching, then you want to do everything you can to try and heal your own wounds. And this can be a lifelong journey. It's not necessarily a goal. It's usually better thought of as a process. And romantic relationships especially, but I think also any relationship, can be a very good tool for discovering where we have these sorts of unhealed wounds. So very, very valuable. Relationship is very valuable for us. There are stories in the yogic tradition about monks or meditators going off into caves and having these great realizations and then coming back and going into the market and having a tantrum or getting triggered by something very quickly, right? They have this great realization. They think, I'm done. I could not get any higher than I am. And then they come down off the mountain out of their cave and they interact with someone and immediately they get triggered. So there's a reason why these stories are shared, because they are very relevant to what we're dealing with. So keep those in mind. So relationship, very, very good for us, generally speaking. It's going to show us where we might have work to do. But emotional honesty, when you do X, I feel Y. Okay, so let's say you and the person you're relating with are practicing this. What do you do when someone tells you that, or what should your partner do? So my feeling right now is there are two responses. The first thing you want to be sure is that the person heard you, or that you heard the person. And a good way to do this is very often repeating back in your own words or in their own words, repeating to you, if you're the one being emotionally honest, what was heard or what was said, right? So again, when I ask you to take out the trash and you don't, I don't feel loved. So then the person hearing this emotional honesty, this emotional confession, might say, okay, let me see if I understand this. Last night when you asked me to take out the trash and I said I would, this morning when you woke up and you saw that the trash was still there, that made you feel like you weren't loved or you're not cared for, or whatever it might be. And then the person can correct you, or they can say, correct, that is right. Okay, so verifying what was said, an important step. Then once basically the person can say, I've heard you, I understand you, and both are in agreement that yes, you've heard me, you've understood me, there are really only two responses that I can see at this moment. One is, I heard you, and I will try and change to make you feel better. Now again, a temptation amongst spiritual people, like you might be, myself, people who are interested in self-development and progress, is it might be very tempting to say, well, you shouldn't feel that way. Or again, to try and justify, well, I was busy and I was tired, that's why I didn't take out the trash. Again, one-offs, they will happen. And I even explain to people doing this work that even though a person may want to change, it may take a while before they are able to change. Personal change is actually very hard. So we shouldn't expect, even though someone says, hey, I heard you and I want to change, that they will change immediately. But again, if you say, well, I was just so tired last night, that's why I didn't take out the trash. Well, then what about all the other times that is maybe a similar thing happened? Again, we're generally looking for patterns. We aren't looking for one time you messed up, one time you did this or that. I'm not sure that emotional honesty is as helpful or useful in those instances. So, resisting the urge to justify, to, again, tell the other person that their feelings are illegitimate or that they're crazy, right? Again, that's gaslight. You're crazy, of course I love you. Look at all this stuff I'm doing. But what you might find is that if you just took out the trash, you don't need to do all that other stuff. That's what's interesting about us as human beings, is I may bring you diamonds as a declaration of love, and that may not make you feel loved at all, right? So if I say, hey, what's important to me is that you feel loved, then I should actually listen for what makes you feel loved. Now, sometimes people are actually not that aware of what is important to them or what makes them feel loved, and that can happen. And then that might be a place where someone needs to do some self-work and introspection. Really figure out what honestly makes us feel loved. And in my experience, this often isn't that complicated. It doesn't require a lot of money. It doesn't require a lot of trips to Europe or things like that, generally speaking. Very often, it's things like, I wish you would hold me more. Or I wish you would listen or validate my perspective or show me that you understand or spend more time with me or look into my eyes when we talk or put away your phone when we are together as much as possible maybe. Maybe it's not completely possible. So often these things are little things. They are simple things. They are not, oh, I need you to make $1 billion and lavish me with gifts and then I will feel loved. If that were someone's love language, so to speak, you might want to investigate, what's going on. Some people, they do appreciate gifts, but usually these gifts don't need to be elaborate and expensive. Little thoughtful gifts, right? That show that you're listening and you're paying attention to what someone values, their taste maybe, what they like. These are very often more meaningful than spending a lot of money. So one reaction is, I hear you, and I'm going to try and change. Now, notice what I said, not I'm going to change, I'm going to try to change, because again, this will likely take time and it will likely be a process. The other response could be, I do love you, or whatever the feeling is, but I don't feel like I can change that, or I don't want to change that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, that can be an honest and legitimate response, that I feel like right now this is a part of who I am that I'm not interested in changing. And I do think that we as individuals have a right to say that. And again, this goes the other way too, right? Very often we might be with a partner and they don't feel loved because of something we do, and we might want to say, well, you shouldn't feel that way. And again, there can be truth to that. But that's something to be determined by the individual along with a therapist or a counselor or a spiritual teacher. That isn't really something for you to determine unless they ask you. So if your partner says, hey, you know, I feel this way, I feel like it's not healthy or it's not good, what do you think? Then that's different. But usually in relating, the person isn't asking. They're just telling you, hey, when you don't take out the garbage, I don't feel loved. And then, you know, you might come back with, well, that's because your parents were so messed up and you didn't have a healthy relationship. So you need to fix that. I love you. Of course I do. Look at all the things I do. Again, we want to avoid this. Okay? So we want to really look at what they're asking for. We want to ask ourselves, is this something we can do? Is this something we want to do? Because again, from my perspective, I'm really not that interested where I am with spirituality, not really that interested in shoulds and shouldn'ts. It really depends on what do you want. My teaching comes from a place of wanting more joy and peace and bliss and love in your life. If those are things you want, then you quote unquote should follow my advice because it works. But if you're like, hey, I got plenty of that, you know, why should I listen to this guy? Then don't. Absolutely don't. Don't listen to me. There's no should. I don't feel like you're a worse person because of it. It really is a matter of, do you want to get to the destination that I'm trying to get you to? Which again is sometimes called enlightenment, freedom, different names for it. And my experience of it is a process. It isn't a destination in the traditional sense. That's why Zen, they talk about the gateless gate, you know, the pathless path, all these kinds of things, because you're walking this path or trying to get to the gate until you realize that it doesn't really exist. It doesn't exist, not the way that we thought it was. Now, you need to be careful here, because if you aren't ready to really receive or understand that teaching, then you shouldn't try and rush ahead, which people often do. They try and say, oh, there's no gate, there's no path. Okay, I'm just going to do whatever I want. I didn't say you should do whatever you want. I didn't say you should ignore spiritual teaching. I didn't say you should stop meditating. I didn't say you should stop doing yoga. I didn't say you should stop your spiritual practices. Okay, so please understand, all of these things may happen when the time is right. And if I feel that someone is ready to hear that message, then I might give it to them directly. But it can be very, very dangerous for someone who is not ready to hear that message to assume, oh, gateless gate, pathless path. Okay, I'm just going to stop everything. Because usually that's premature, and usually that will just prolong your suffering. There will be more suffering for a longer period of time that is unnecessary if this mistake isn't made. So, 2 responses to emotional honesty. One is, I hear you, and I'm going to try and change so that you feel loved, you feel cared for, you feel safe, you feel a sense of peace, whatever it is that the person is seeking in relating with you, right? Because this is very often why we relate with others. The other response, just as legitimate. I am not saying one is superior to the other. The other response is, I hear you, but I don't feel either capable or I don't feel like I want to change for you or so that you feel differently. And then that person can do with that information whatever they want. They could say, well, then we're done. I don't want to relate with you anymore. And that's a legitimate response. Or they could say, okay, let me see what I can do on my end. Which is a good idea regardless, I'll say, because in a sense, the less we feel that we need from the world and from others, the happier we're going to be, the more peaceful we're going to be. If I feel like I need something from one person in particular, like love, then what tends to happen is what the Buddhists call grasping. I tend to start to hold that person and that relationship tightly. And in my experience, love, true love, doesn't tend to thrive in that kind of environment. This is not a really loving thing. Okay, this is. So the open hand of love, loving in a way that others feel free. I think it really is the only way to truly love, because otherwise what we're calling love is probably control or manipulation, or again, trying to get our needs met at the expense of others' needs. So, saying, again, I hear you. I want to try and change so that you feel loved, you feel cared for, you feel what you want to feel in this relationship. Or, second response, I love you, I care about you, but I'm not willing to change for you to feel better or feel differently. And then again, I don't really think it's your place to say you should change, but they may decide, right? They might say, well, okay, I love you so much, I'm going to stop caring about the trash, or I'm going to try and stop caring about the trash. And again, that is where you can work with a counselor or a teacher, therapist, and examine, is this thing about the trash, is this some past trauma? Is this some conditioning that I can let go of? Or is this something that's really fundamental to who I am that isn't likely to change in this lifetime? Ultimately, everything changes, folks. Everything. You will not stay the same person, because you will not even stay as a person. You will eventually, this form will dissolve. And even if you believe that the thoughts and ideas and, the sort of soul, if you will, goes on, it too will eventually dissolve. Everything, all forms dissolve in time, which doesn't really exist, but in time, all forms dissolve back into the space of awareness in which they arose. So this is inevitable for all forms. Anything that we can point to or name or identify in time will return or dissolve, disappear. So it really doesn't matter what we're talking about. But we might say, you know what, I've tried working on this. It doesn't seem like it wants to budge, and that's not going to change. So again, you might say, well, we need to stop relating. Now, the third possibility, I've already alluded to it some, but I want you to be aware of it, is working with a counselor or a teacher, somebody like me. I might say to an individual, I think you will be happier. And again, I want you to understand, I'm saying this for their benefit. I'm not saying this like, you're deficient and you need to be fixed. Okay, that's how many people might hear what's being said and might understand what's being said, but it's not what's being said. From my perspective, you're perfect as you are. You don't need to be fixed or changed. You don't need to do anything differently. If you're happy with status quo, then keep on keeping on. The only thing I ask is that you be really honest about, are you happy with the status quo? Be honest with yourself. And that is one of the most important things we can do in life, is be honest with ourselves. Am I happy with how things are? If you can give an honest yes, that I am experiencing more happiness on balance than suffering, or joy. Sometimes I don't like the word happiness, because I will use the word joy instead, uncaused joy. So if you're experiencing more joy than suffering, and you just have these sort of blips of suffering every now and then, then you're probably doing a pretty good job, however you're approaching life and your thoughts and your heart and healing and growth. That sounds very good to me. But if you look and you ask honestly, is that my experience? And you're like, well, no, actually, I have a lot of anxiety. I'm really stressed out. I have these bouts of depression. Maybe you even feel depressed most of the time with little blips of happiness, which is the opposite, the inverse of the way that I feel things really should be experienced for us most of the time. Well, then what I might say to you as a counselor or spiritual guide is, for your own benefit, you might want to let go of needing the trash to be taken out to feel loved. The trash, honestly, I'm just using it as an example. Probably not that big a deal. It's not that hard for someone to learn to take out the trash. But sometimes people have these desires, and sometimes they may be unreasonable. You may want someone to do extraordinary things in order to feel loved. And this is a little bit in contrast to what I said earlier, where most healthy people will want certain things from their partner, which are generally very simple, small, little things to feel loved, right? To feel cared for whatever reason. And again, ultimately, you may even still want to let go of those things because really there's just so much love. And we don't need it from one individual person. We have it inside of ourselves. We don't even need it from a group of people. So finding that and knowing that is a very important part of what we're doing. But a lot of those small things, they can actually make life kind of fun and interesting, right? That satisfaction of, say, craving an ice cream and then going and getting the ice cream. Yeah, maybe we want to let go of that craving. But it can be so delicious and wonderful when we can satisfy some of those cravings. So yes, we want to let go of those cravings that are causing us a lot of suffering. But my experience is not all cravings cause suffering. And that's, again, where we want to be really honest about our experience. Some cravings are there so that we can enjoy experiencing them. In the Shivite tradition, it is said that Shiva cloaks and loses himself so that he can experience the joy of discovering his true nature again, who he is. So this is a good example of what I'm speaking about. If Shiva just remained in awareness of his all-powerful nature, then he wouldn't get to experience the joy of being like, oh my goodness, I am Shiva. You. That is your journey according to that tradition. That is the journey you want to make. You discover that you are the all-powerful, all-knowing root or foundation, fundamental ground of being. That is actually who and what you are. That's what this path is ultimately about. And that's where sometimes both letting go of our needs and desires can show us that, but also sometimes indulging in them without bringing in the suffering. Right? And this is the key. Are my desires actually part of my bliss, or are they causing me suffering? And a great story about this is Layla and Majnun, which is if you know the Eric Clapton song Layla, that song and that album was inspired partly by this epic poem. And it's about a madman he's driven mad. He was a prince, I believe, and he's driven mad because of his love for Layla, this woman. And that love both drives him mad, but it's also his bliss. It's like a kind of blissful spiritual suffering, if you will. So we can call it suffering or we can call it something else, but this also can be an aspect of the path in life in general, that bliss of separation. To some extent, this is what the bhakti path is about. To, in a sense, know ourselves as separate from the divine so that we can worship the divine, and in that actually experience that union, that reunification. That is what yoga is about. This can be a very blissful experience. Think of being, say, separated from your lover for a period of time and then reuniting with them, and the bliss that that can bring. Would the bliss have been as potent and powerful if there weren't the separation before it? This is one of the mysterious and interesting things about being human and about life, is it's often that contrast that make things very interesting. All right, everyone. So to summarize, when someone is being emotionally honest with you, there are really only two responses I feel appropriate as a partner, as someone listening to someone being emotionally honest. Is one, I hear you and I will try and change because I want you to feel differently. Because again, it really is you changing your behavior, not the words you say or not explaining why you did what you did. It's a pattern. So I'm going to try and change that pattern in the future. And this, if you are that person, this is spiritual growth on your part, because really you can't make personal change without some spiritual growth happening, generally speaking. Personal change is hard. So nothing wrong with that if you choose to go that path. The other path, again, just as legitimate. I hear you, but I don't feel called. And I do think it's important to feel called, right? Your honest response, right? Because you might say, oh, I'll do that for you, but you don't really mean it. It's not in your heart of hearts. So in your heart of hearts, you look and you say, yes, I want to change. Or you look and you say, you know what? I feel pretty good as I am. I'm kind of happy with that aspect of my personality, myself. I don't feel like I want to change that for anybody. It doesn't mean I don't love you, but I understand that you may not feel loved. And I'm just going to have to accept that. You're going to have to accept that. Then again, the person hearing that can do with it what they will. They can say, okay, then I'll try and change. I'll try and let go of that. Or they might say, I want to find someone who will do that for me. And that's a legitimate response. And then again, the third thing that I want to make you aware of, because it's not as cut and dry as that, is with a counselor or therapist or spiritual teacher or guide, life coach, someone of that nature, someone who has this individual's best interest in mind, because that's where I'm coming from. If that individual is open to it, I might suggest, you know what? You'd be happier letting that go. Now, it doesn't have to be one or the other. You might have a partner who says, I want you to feel loved. You say that you don't feel loved when I don't take out the trash. So I am going to take out the trash. And then simultaneously, the person who's bothered by the trash not being taken out might work with a counselor or teacher to let go of perhaps a past traumatic event or conditioning from their family of origin that makes the trash such an important symbol of love, right? That they can say, well, you know what? I know you were busy. I know you were tired. And this is a very important point, everybody. There isn't just one right way of seeing things. So while it may be true that if someone really understands you and they know how important it is that the trash gets taken out, no matter what, no matter how tired they are, no matter how busy they are, no matter what is going on, if they really know how important it is to you, they will take out the trash. That may be very well true, right? A lot of this I find doing this work with others is that people just don't know how important it is. It just doesn't register. So often they're busy being defensive, but I do this, I do that. Why can't you appreciate this or that, right? They're just not, they're hearing it as a criticism. And if you know how to do emotional honesty properly, it's not criticism. It's just, hey, X, when you do X, I feel Y. That's it. It's not, I shouldn't feel X. It's not, you shouldn't do Y. It's when you do X, I feel Y. That's it. That's it. No judgment, no shoulds, no shouldn'ts. When you do X, I feel Y. When you don't take out the trash, I don't feel loved. That's it, okay? So again, we have those different ways of responding to that information. And our partner can work on their end, and we simultaneously can work with someone to let go of needing to be loved in just one specific way. We can begin opening our eyes perhaps to all the ways that we are loved that might be different than the ways that we want to be loved. And that's the beauty of growth and enlightenment and spirituality, is at a certain point we just feel loved by everything and everyone. And maybe not in the sense of a romantic love or even a familial love, but a transcendent, deeper love, that existence itself is love itself, that all of this is for you and not against you. And that can be a very difficult place to get to without some guidance and help. But ultimately, that is where I'm hoping you will get, because it's a very enjoyable place to live a human life from. All right, everyone, if you're still here, thank you for listening. If you feel like I can help you with some of this stuff, please do reach out. I work with many people one-on-one, and I'd be happy to work with you. You can contact me via my website, mahapathayoga.com, my Patreon page, any of my socials. And I'll hope to see you next time. Until then, namaste and have a beautiful day.